Hi everyone, it's Mia from Creative Adventure Lab. Thank you so much for purchasing one of our virtual classes. This is our marbled clay dishes, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through the steps how to use your kit. So there should be an info sheet in your kit that goes over how to set up your workspace and what all you should have included, so you can kind of make sure you have everything, and there might be a few things you could use from home, so grab those ahead of time. I do recommend watching the video first so that you can kind of know where the project is going, so you don't have to pause it and oh, I gotta go grab this or something like that. So watch it one time through. It won't be super long. It's a pretty quick project, and then the next time if you want to play it while you're working on the project, that's a good idea. So I'm just going to go over the supplies quickly. You should have a bucket of air dry clay. This is a bigger bucket, but you have a smaller bucket in there. A paint, a little thing of black paint. It's tempera paint, a small cup of sealant. This is just water and glue mixed together, and this is going to seal in your air dry clay after it, so we don't have to bake it or fire it or anything like that. You should also have a popsicle stick and a small little foam brush and some gloves. Gloves are very important because we are going to get kind of messy. But we're going to get started here, so I'm just going to jump right in. So the first step is actually to find a bowl or a dish that you want to kind of shape your clay to. So a couple things that I used at home while I was making them, I used just a cup, and I kind of laid the clay on the inside and it naturally took that shape. The sample piece that I made earlier, I used this little paint dish, and I also used just a small mixing bowl, but this is probably the biggest size thing that I used. So you can, with the clay that we have, you can get a lot out of it. So you can make a couple big dishes and a few little ones, or you can make a bunch of little ones. It's really up to you how you want to go about it. So if you don't have anything like that, that's okay too. You can just make a flat dish, like a coaster. I wouldn't recommend using it as a coaster with drinks that are gonna be really wet, but if you just wanted to use it as a dish, put on your dresser and set some jewelry on, or your bathroom, that would work too. So the first thing we're gonna do, take out a chunk of clay, and the size of the clay or the chunk that you pick out just depends on what size of dish you want to make. So I'm going to make a little one. I think this is about the size chunk that I use to make this size dish that fits in this little paint cup. So if you want to make a big one, like the size of this bowl, you're just going to use a little more clay. So I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and I'm just going to squish it around in my hand just to make sure it's kind of moving well and make sure it's all together. You don't want to have a few little separate chunks. So, and then I'm just going to kind of squish it with my hands to flatten it out a little bit. It really doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to mess it up anyway, but I'm just going to kind of pinch in there with my hands, and I'm going to set it down on my newsprint. Alright, so now the fun part, I'm going to add the paint. We didn't give you a lot of paint because a lot of paint goes a really, really long way in this project. So this is what your popsicle stick is for. You are going to just scoop out a little bit. One little scoop of paint on the popsicle stick is all I used to make this. So you really, really don't need a lot of paint. And then I'm just gonna kind of, oops, you can't see that, sorry. There you go. You can kind of just, I kind of just spread it out. So that's kind of what I did there. If you use too much paint, it's basically just going to turn your clay gray. So you're not going to be able to see any of the cool marble stuff. You can always go back and add more paint, even if you add too much. Then you basically just have a darker colored clay. You could add more paint to that. Obviously, the amount of paint depends on the size of your dish, so if you're using more clay, you want to add a little bit more paint, but a little paint goes a long way, so just keep that in mind. Now this is where I'm going to put on my gloves, because this is going to be the messy part. I think we included 2 sets of gloves in your kit, so you might reuse them if you're making a lot of dishes. This, there's no really scientific method to doing this. We're folding the clay to kind of mix the paint in to the clay. And you want the clay to absorb the paint, but you want it to still have some cool patterns in there. So if you're getting some wet paint on your hand, this time I'm not, I might take a little chunk off. You can see in there, there's some wet paint, and that's okay. This is why you're wearing the gloves, because you're gonna get some wet paint on your hands. And then you might kind of move it around the clay, which is fine, because that's gonna add some cool designs to it. But you don't wanna overwork it. You don't wanna keep folding and folding and folding. You just wanna, once you think it's got some cool patterns, you can see some stuff going on in there, I would just leave it. Even if there's still a little bit of wet paint, that's okay. It's better to have a little bit of wet paint than to overwork it. You can see on this one, like when I made this one yesterday, this was wet paint up here, and now it's just a little darker, but I think it looks fine. So now we're going to roll out our clay. So you don't need a rolling pin for this. You can use a bottle of paint, a cup, even this size cup, whatever you want. But first we're gonna flatten it out with our hands. So I'm just gonna use the palm of my hand just to flatten it out as much as I can. Save us some work. Okay. And then I'm gonna take my rolling thing, whatever you have around, and roll it out. And I don't want to go too thin, but if it's not as big as you want it, you can keep rolling it. But if I'm going to use this dish again, I think that's going to cover it. It's going to be fine. Now, you can cut out your clay and make it a perfect circle or make it a different shape if you want. You can use a butter knife. That'll cut through the clay just fine. And just make sure you wash it off after, obviously. Or you can use whatever cup you have, kind of like as a cookie cutter, or a cookie cutter if you have that too. So I'm going to try to do that. Squish it in there. And this is obviously not going to be exact because it doesn't have sharp edges, but it worked pretty well. Now we got to peel it out. Alright, so now I have a nicer looking circle there. So now here we need some more paper. So I'm just going to rip off a square, or not a square, just a shape of my paper. And you can see on this one how I put the paper underneath the clay and on top of the dish. This keeps the clay from sticking to the dish as it dries, so the clay is not going to stick to the paper. And even if it does a little bit, you can peel the paper off. But if it sticks to the dish underneath it, then when you try to peel it off, you might lose some clay. So you don't want that. So I found it works best to put the clay or put the paper on the inside so that it's on the bottom of your dish. So you can see here how the paper like wrinkles a little bit underneath, so you are going to get some wrinkles on the bottom of your dish. I don't know if you can really see that, but so I like to put those on the bottom because they just won't be seen as much as on the top. So if I were to reverse this and put the paper like this and then drape the clay over it, those wrinkles are going to be on the inside, which is what's going to be facing up. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us via email or Facebook. So I'm going to place my paper in there, and then I'm going to pick which side I like. So you see, this side really doesn't have that much cool marbling going on, but this side does. So I'm gonna make this side my top, the side that is gonna face up when I put it on my table or my dresser or something like that. So I'm gonna put my clay on my dish here, and then I'm just gonna kind of poke it down in the middle very gently, because I don't want to poke a hole through the clay, but I'm just kind of pushing it down with my fingers. I'm not gonna try to turn it into a cup, you know, it doesn't really need to have that much depth, but just a little indent in the middle so it can hold like my rings, bracelets, keys, stuff like that. And now I'm going to work on smoothing out the edges. I'm just doing this with my finger. And you can use water if your clay is dry and it's not smoothing out with your finger the way you like it to, but it will smear the paint a little bit. So just remember that you still have some wet paint in there. So it is going to smear that paint if you have water and you're moving it. You can do it really lightly and you won't notice much smearing, but there could be still some smearing. So just be cautious of that. But I just smooth it out with my fingertips and I think it's fine. And it's not meant to be perfect. They kind of remind me of like little rocks. So they're not supposed to be perfectly circle, but it's totally up to you. Whenever you're satisfied with the smoothness, the shape, then you're just gonna go ahead and set it aside for 24 hours. So you want a full 24 hours till it can fully harden. So that's why you wanna have somewhere you can set it where it won't get messed with, knocked over. Don't put it by your cat if you have a cat. So we just wanna set that aside, and then after 24 hours, you can come back to it. So this has been hardening for 24 hours. You can see it's not really floppy. It's gonna maintain that shape that I put it in. So you can see how that curved just a little bit, just enough so I can set it down and put some things on it. So I'm gonna get rid of my paper and my dish, and now I just have this cool little dish here. So the next step, the final step, is we're gonna seal it with our glue and water mixture. So this is basically like Mod Podge. If you have Mod Podge, you can use that. If you have any other kind of like varnish or something, your parents have it, you can use that. If you want it to be really, really shiny, Mod Podge will make it shiny. This, our mixture isn't gonna make it quite as shiny. So that's up to you. You can also get glitter Mod Podge if you wanna save your clay, so you have enough clay, you know, to make a lot of dishes. So if you want to make one dish just to test it out and then you want to get some glitter stuff to put on it, you can save the rest of your clay and make some more dishes and make them exactly the way you want it. Or if you want to get other colors of paint and put them in there, that's totally up to you. There's a lot you can do with this after you learn the technique. So I'm going to take my little sealant and I'm going to paint it on my dish. And it's going to dry clear. It's just really to protect it and make it as waterproof as possible. So I'm gonna use my foam brush for this, and I like to do one side, so I'm just gonna do the inside here quickly and show you guys. And you can see how it's shiny going on, but it should dry clear even though it looks kind of milky. If you have some spots that are staying more milky, that just means you might need to spread it out a little bit more. And I'm going to do the edges too with this front side, just to really make sure that everything is coated. Alright, so I don't know if you can really see that, but it's all coated on there. I just like to do one side, so I'll do my top, and then I'll let that dry. It doesn't take that long to dry, and if you're in a hurry, you can put it in front of a fan and it'll dry really fast. If it gets on your fingers, it is kind of sticky, but it'll wash off. So I'm just going to set that down to dry, and then when that's dry, I'm going to flip it over and do my back side, and that just protects the whole thing. So yeah, and that's all there is. Thank you for watching. We do have other kits and classes available on our website. If you just go to creativeadventurelab.org, On the home page there is an update section. If you click on that, it'll take you to everything that we're doing now during this time, since we can't do our regular classes and things like that. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting us during this time. If you have any questions, you can always email us at artlab@creativeadventurelab.org. Thank you.